How did it all get so bad here in Vancouver? So a lot of people think that it's gotten really bad, or I guess the cost to rent here in Vancouver has gotten really bad because of investors. And the ideology here is that if there weren't investors, then there would be less people buying homes, then the prices wouldn't have gone up as much as they've gone up, and then a lot of people who rent today would have been able to buy a home, and instead now that home has gone to an investor who just rents it out. Now, it makes sense at face value. However, if these investors weren't in the mix, the cost to rent would actually go higher than it is right now. And likely prices would find a stable bottom somewhere long before it ever became affordable for the majority to own home. All that would happen is that real estate prices would probably come down a little bit. I'm saying if we removed investors from the mix, or we had less investors buying homes, right? Real estate prices would come down a bit. And then the market would kind of stabilize, and then you'd have people from, say, Calgary, Winnipeg, Ontario, everywhere else in Canada would start actually moving to BC, now seeing that prices have dropped, and it would be their chance to get into the market, have people moving here, people immigrating and buying these homes instead of the tenants that live here. Maybe some of the tenants that live here would buy homes, but the majority would still not be at that affordability threshold to purchase a home before people who actually wanted to live in these homes started buying them up. And then, as a result of investors not buying these homes and owner-occupiers buying these homes, the amount of rental supply on the market would just get tighter and tighter and tighter, but the amount of people looking to rent homes would stay the same, and rental prices would then skyrocket. Plus, if investors were the problem, how would this make sense? Okay, so housing stock owned by investors in Vancouver is about 32%, and in North Vancouver, it's only 24%. Yet pricing is very similar, and in fact, parts of North Van are more expensive than a lot of areas in Vancouver. Not only this, and this is like pretty much the rule of thumb all across North America. Almost every city is owned 25 to 35% from by investors. But if we take a look at Nashville, Tennessee here, 30% of the housing stock is owned by investors, and the price of a home is only $429,000, which is 550 some odd thousand in Canadian dollars, which is less than half the cost of an aggregate home in Vancouver, average aggregate home in Vancouver. So same amount of investment happening in Nashville as there is in Vancouver, yet prices are double in Vancouver. So I think it's safe to assume that investors are not the problem. And if it's not investors, then consequently it's not landlords, because investors and landlords are the same person. Now, the next reason that we usually hear how it's gotten so bad in Vancouver is because of flippers and speculators. Now, flippers get a bad rap, but in my opinion, they provide a very valuable service to the market. They're taking old, beaten up inventory, revitalizing it, making it beautiful for somebody else to move in and then enjoy. The next thing is there's a lot of people out there who want to buy a move-in ready home, and there's just not a lot of them available. A lot of the inventory is outdated, 1990s, 2000s, 1970s, whatever. And if they were to buy that home, they wouldn't have the cash left over to do the renovations themselves. So one amazing thing that a flipper does is that when they take an older inventory, renovate it, make it beautiful, the next buyer can now loan, or I guess leverage, the entire cost of the home plus the renovations, where if the home wasn't renovated to begin with, they'd then have to basically put their entire down payment into the home and then possibly renovate it with a line of credit or something like that, or they may not even have the capital at all to renovate it, where you're allowed to mortgage the entire cost of the home plus renovations when a flipper sells the home to you. Now, speculators, I'll say, really don't provide any type of value to the market, right? It's just people are conflating speculators, investors, and flippers. They're all different segments of the market. They're all different people with different goals. Speculators are essentially just buying a property, doing absolutely nothing, providing no value, and hoping the price goes up before they sell. However, over the last 2 years, the market has sucked and has pretty much just been on one giant macro downtrend, and I can assure you there's very little speculating, and there's pretty much almost never been any flipping going on in our market. Very rarely ever do you see a home come to market that was a flip. I don't know the actual statistics, but it's extremely rare. Flipping doesn't work very well in this market, but speculating does happen from time to time. But I will say in the last 2 years, there's definitely very little speculating. And what do you know? The last 2 years has been the fastest rents have pretty much ever increased in our history of Canadian real estate. So I think it's safe to say that, flipping and speculating has no correlation to the cost of rent. Or maybe speculating does, but it's very minuscule because as I just said, rent has increased at a ridiculous rate in the last 2 years, and there's been very little speculating going on. So it's not the investors, it's not the flippers, it's not the speculators, it's not the landlords. What is it then? I think it's the result of two simple things. One being the degradation of our currency, the long-term degradation of our currency, and two, the result of a supply shortage, which I've talked about many times, but I'm going to break it down a little bit more. The first thing is that wages have not kept pace with the cost of everything over the long term, and this is due to the degradation of our currency, inflation. People will say that when costs go up, landlords will actually raise their rents to cover the costs of how much the costs have increased. But this actually isn't true, because a landlord can't just say, I want $5,000 a month for this place, unless there's actually a buyer willing to pay $5,000 a month. So what actually happens is costs increase, the cost to own an investment property increases. And there's a short period of time where the costs have gone up, but the rent hasn't gone up with it. And therefore it becomes less profitable to buy investment property and rent it out. Therefore, more people stop buying investment property, and this leads to overall supply in the rental market going down. And when the supply goes down, but the amount of people looking to rent a place stays the same, then you have an imbalance. And then as a landlord, you can put up a place for rent and it gets like 37 applications. You literally get into a bidding war for that place. And then it's like, if you have one guy willing to pay you 25 and one guy willing to pay you 29, obviously you're going to take the guy who's willing to pay you 29, because why wouldn't you just take an extra $400? And then that's how rent starts increasing. So when the costs go up, it results in overall rental supply being made available because it's less profitable. And then after the rental rates go up, you'll have more people investing in rental property again. And then that's what brings more supply to market and puts the market back in equilibrium and stops rental rates from rising, is because now people are actively investing back into the rental market and renting out units, adding to the supply. So it's not landlords raising rent. It's just the cost of maintenance, taxes, repairs, and everything else going up. And all of those expenses go up, simply put, because of inflation. And inflation happens for a multitude of reasons. I personally think the biggest one is debt and government overspending, or frivolous. Is that the right word? Frivolous spending? Spending money on stuff that we don't need and just kind of setting money on fire, and then printing more money is basically what has, devalued our currency over the long term. But I'm not an economist, so maybe do your research. But regardless, one thing I do know is that inflation is probably the biggest reason to blame for why rents are as high as what they are. Number two, and I've talked about this a lot of times, I'm going to try to give you guys spark notes, but it's basically just supply. Too many people moving here, immigration, in comparison to the amount of homes being built. And it has been like this for a long time. And then on top of that, only recently in the last couple years, the amount of homes being purchased for investment purposes, rental supply, is decreasing significantly because interest rates are so high and rents haven't gone up to actually close that gap between the cost to own investment property and what you get for renting them out. And then there's municipal policy and, permitting and application processes that are, restricting new supply being easily added to the market. And then there's government policy like rent control, which I've made videos on, that in the short term, yes, helps tenants, but over the long macro term, it actually hurts tenants. Because what ends up happening with rent control is you have somebody who needs to move. Maybe they just had a kid and they're renting a 2-bedroom apartment with their spouse and they need to move to a 3-bedroom apartment, but they're getting such a good rental rate on their 2-bedroom apartment because they've been there for 2 or 3 years. Well, if they were just paying the normal market rates, they would probably just move and upgrade their lifestyle right now because there's no benefit of staying in that 2-bedroom. Well, because they're paying drastically below market rates, they end up staying there. And because there are so many tenants in this exact same position, you have less supply turning through the market. And as a result, rental rates go up like this instead of a trajectory more like that. And you don't believe me? Look at what's happening in the resale market right now. Why is supply so low right now? It's because the majority of Canadians, about 65% right now, 45%, I think, 43%. I don't know where I'm getting these numbers from, but I know it's 43% still have a mortgage of about 2.8% or something like that. Don't quote me on these statistics, look it up for yourself, but all I know is a large majority of Canadians are still at old interest rates, just like a large majority of renters are still paying old rents. And the result of that is why supply is so low. They know if I sell my house, I now have to take on the new interest rates at 6.5%. Just like the renter knows if they move, they have to take on the new market rate, which is like 20% higher than what they're paying right now. As a result, less inventory coming onto the market, and this is what is keeping prices high in the real estate market, just like what has caused, or at least attributed to, prices going up faster than what they normally would in the rental side of things, is rent control. So in the short term, rent has gotten so bad, not because of all of the things that I've listed, but mainly because of inflation. I would say that's the main thing. And I would also argue that a lot of the supply issues that we're having are indirectly caused by inflation as well. And not only inflation, but obviously supply is another big one. Those are the two biggest reasons why rent is so bad in Vancouver. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, drop me a like. I'm 𝐎𝐓𝐇𝐄𝐑. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.